Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage on the latest mission from the Cape on a bit of a soggy Thursday evening. I'm Will Robinson Smith, and I'll be providing our commentary for the duration of this coverage of SpaceX's next mission of a Falcon 9 launch. Broadcasting tonight from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Joined tonight by Stephen Young, who is running our graphics and keeping an eye on everything, as well as Adam Bernstein, who's operating the cameras and is being a trooper since it's been raining off and on, and we appreciate him being out in the elements to help us bring you these fantastic shots of both the Falcon Heavy and the Falcon 9. We'll get into all the things here. As you can see, we're starting this broadcast with a split screen, not what we always do, but in this case, on the left-hand side is SpaceX's Falcon Heavy rocket at Launch Complex 39A here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. On board at the top of that rocket in the payload fairings is the Jupiter 3 satellite for EchoStar. On the right is Space Launch Complex 40, also known as Slick 40. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket standing by for launching another batch of Starlink satellites. As you may recall, last night, SpaceX aborted the Falcon Heavy launch at T-minus 1 minute and 5 seconds. That set up what was looking like a pretty exciting launch day with a potential double header. Obviously, whenever you have two rockets going off in the same day, that's always a treat enough. However, this would have been extra special since it would have broken the record for the fastest back-to-back launches from the Eastern Range in history. Unfortunately, that 56-year-old record set by the Gemini 11 mission remains intact, so history not going to be broken today on that front. SpaceX says they're holding off on launching the Heavy, quote, to complete vehicle checkouts, end quote. Right now, they're targeting launch of the Heavy tomorrow, Friday, July 28th at 11:04 p.m. Eastern. That's the same window that they had tonight, same as yesterday. And that's 0304 UTC on July 29th for our viewers around the world. Again, the launch window will last 99 minutes, and we'll bring you that coverage as it happens, assuming SpaceX doesn't need another day to continue doing checkouts on the Falcon Heavy. So, where does that leave us tonight? Leaves us with one launch on the books today, that being the Falcon 9. And in less than an hour, at T-minus 56 minutes and counting, SpaceX is targeting a T0 liftoff of 11:10 p.m. Eastern. That's 0310 UTC of the Starlink Group 6-7 mission. Now, the launch window for tonight technically opens in 5 minutes at 10:20. That's 0220 UTC. However, SpaceX decided to waive off the opportunity for its earliest launch potential today. That being because likely the weather is not being terribly cooperative. We'll talk a little bit more detail about that in just a little bit. First off, want to say thank you to the nearly 1,800 of you that are joining us for our live coverage. Thank you from wherever you're watching. Please go ahead and jump in the chat. Sound off where you're watching our live coverage from, whether you're just down the road here on Florida's Space Coast or from elsewhere around the world. And of course, if you'd like to support our coverage of the space program, we'd appreciate it if you hit that like button if you're enjoying the coverage of this and future launches. Click subscribe so you get notifications when new videos are posted here and so you don't miss any of our live streams. And while you're at it, if you could share the stream, that would be fantastic since it helps more people find our coverage and keep up to date with everything happening on this channel. And naturally, we can't do these launch broadcasts without the support of viewers like you and our wonderful members. So thank you to everyone who's made a contribution to help fund our coverage. We are powered by you, so we really appreciate it. And if you'd like to help improve and expand that coverage, consider making a donation through YouTube's Super Chat feature or become a member of the channel. Our members get access to special member-only videos as well as discounts from our online shop. We're under 20 minutes now from the point at which the SpaceX launch director will give their go for the start of propellant load for tonight's launch. They're running the operations for this mission out of Hangar X here at Kennedy Space Center. It's the facility where they refurbish the Falcon boosters, prepare them for the flights. SpaceX actually has conducted a few launches from Hangar X and is preparing to manage the Crew 7 mission in August from that side as well. SpaceX teams also get support from the control room at their headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Launch director will conduct their go, no-go poll electronically as we approach T-minus 53 minutes and counting. By now, the chief engineer should have already conducted a technical poll. Want to make a note that as our countdown clock approaches T-minus 52 minutes and counting, weather remains a watch item for the SpaceX launch teams. Right now, the target T0 is, as we mentioned, 11:10, but SpaceX does have additional launch opportunities, so we are keeping track of all that for you. 45th Weather Squadron coming into tonight's attempt said the odds of favorable weather at the pad is about 40%, so 60% chance of violating weather. Main issue right now, we've had a little bit of rain throughout the evening, but the cloud cover that's hanging around the Cape is culprit number one when it comes to the potential for a weather delay. As far as the backup opportunities for tonight's mission, after 11:10 p.m. or 03:10 UTC, SpaceX has one more backup launch opportunity in this window. That's technically tomorrow morning for our viewers here on the East Coast. That's 12:01 a.m. EDT or 04:01 UTC on July 28th. If things, for whatever reason, likely weather potentially, but if they don't pan out for a launch tonight, SpaceX also has up to 4 backup launch opportunities. That's tomorrow, July 28th, should they choose those. Starts at 10:04 p.m. Eastern, 02:04 UTC, runs through and as things continue to be fluid tonight, it appears as though SpaceX may be targeting that 12:01 a.m. Eastern launch opportunity for tonight as they continue to track the weather as a watch item. So we'll keep an eye on that. Again, as they are looking to pivot toward just a hair after midnight launch opportunity, that will be the last target time for tonight. So if they are not able to go then, windows tomorrow start at 10:04 p.m. Eastern, 02:04 UTC, and run through 12:26 a.m. 04:26 UTC on July 29th. T-minus 49 minutes and counting. You'll notice the countdown clock has popped off. That does not mean that SpaceX is done for tonight. We are simply updating the time to reflect the new T0 at 12:01 a.m. Eastern, 4:01 UTC. Countdown clock will be reposted momentarily. And as you see, we've now reset the countdown clock to reflect the new T0 of 12:01 a.m. Eastern, 04:01 UTC. Again, this is the last opportunity that SpaceX will have in this current window to launch its Falcon 9 rocket and the Starlink 6-7 mission. So we will continue to keep an eye on SpaceX's progress as well as the weather, and we will keep you posted as the count proceeds, and hopefully SpaceX will be able to launch one of the two rockets that it was intending to today. Count stands at T-minus 1 hour, 36 minutes and counting. Good evening, and thank you to all of you who may be recently joining us for our launch coverage tonight. Will Robinson Smith for Spaceflight now. As you may notice, typically start a launch broadcast at about T minus 1 hour and counting. However, you see the clock at 1 hour 29 minutes. That's because SpaceX originally was counting down to a T0 of 11:10 p.m. Eastern. They recently opted to go for their last launch opportunity of this window, which is 12:01 a.m. early in the morning on Friday the 28th. That's 04:01 UTC. Weather has remained the biggest watch item for tonight, as 45th Weather Squadron coming into this evening said favorable weather odds are only about 40%. Lots of thick clouds and some periodic rain have been seen here across Florida's Space Coast throughout much of this afternoon and evening. And of course, for the viewers that are just joining us as well, first of all, welcome. Appreciate it if you could hit the like button, share the stream to help more people find our coverage throughout the course of this launch opportunity for SpaceX. We still have some great views of the Falcon Heavy on the left-hand side of your screen there. SpaceX decided to stand down from the opportunity to have a doubleheader, historic doubleheader today, launching the Falcon Heavy rocket as well, but they are holding off on that with the intention of launching potentially as early as tomorrow. Of course, whenever SpaceX is prepared for that, we will bring you that coverage live as well. And on the off chance that this Falcon 9 launch of the Starlink 6-7 mission delays as well, that sets up another potential history-making opportunity for SpaceX, depending on the timeline of both of these launches. Countdown for the Starlink mission stands at T minus 1 hour 27 minutes and counting. Now under T minus 1 hour, 25 minutes and counting. Worth noting when it comes to the weather that if SpaceX is not able to launch tonight and decides to pivot to tomorrow with this Falcon 9 rocket, the weather does significantly improve. As I mentioned, the chance of favorable weather tonight is only 40%, jumps up to 65% tomorrow. Again, the primary concerns do remain different types of clouds. 45th Weather Squadron describes those as chance of violating the cumulus cloud rule, the thick cloud layers rule, and the anvil cloud rules. It's basically lots of clouds hanging around. I mean, it's not terribly surprising given that it is Florida. It is the dog days of summer, and we do have some tropical activity that's happening offshore and bringing a little disturbance here to Central Florida, and that's not exactly the ideal recipe for launching a rocket. So definitely a watch item SpaceX continues to keep an eye on as they push toward the launch of both of the rockets you see on your screen. T minus 1 hour, 23 minutes and counting. T-minus 1 hour, 11 minutes, 30 seconds and counting as SpaceX continues on towards the potential launch of its Falcon 9 rocket at its final teaser opportunity of this evening, that being 12:01 a.m. Eastern, the first minute of Friday morning, the end of the work week. So hopefully everyone's had a good either work week or vacation if you are so lucky. And thank you to the 3,300 of you that are now joining in the stream. Appreciate you all being here with us tonight. If you are enjoying the coverage, if you could hit the like button and share the stream, certainly appreciate you helping to spread our coverage of the space endeavor to more people, and it really helps us develop our coverage and reach more people with it. So I want to talk a little bit about the mission tonight, Starlink 6-7, and its place both for SpaceX as well as sort of in the overall launch landscape. Taking a look at some of the statistics behind tonight's mission. If SpaceX is able to launch tonight, this will be the 37th launch from Florida's Space Coast this year. Tonight's launch, assuming all of these are, if it launches, this will be the 242nd launch of a Falcon 9 rocket. 248th launch of a Falcon 9/Falcon Heavy together. As far as the pattern of success for SpaceX, this would mark the 228th successful Falcon 9/Heavy launch consecutively. SpaceX has now reached 50 launches, or will reach 50 launches tonight with a successful liftoff. That's a Falcon 9 and Heavy rockets. If you put it all together with Starship on April 20th, this will be the 51st launch for SpaceX on the year. As far as the pad here, this is Space Launch Complex 40 that you're looking at on the right-hand side of your screen. A very active site here on Florida's Space Coast. 135th launch tonight on tap from pad 40. This will also be the 95th dedicated Starlink mission launch for SpaceX as it continues to build out its constellation in low Earth orbit. And as we mentioned, 37th orbital launch attempt from Cape Canaveral this year. So continues to be a very busy year for the Space Coast as we are getting ready to close out the month of July, head into August. Summer winds down. I know a lot of parents are preparing to send their kiddos back to school. School here in Brevard County starts on August 10th. So lots of supplies being bought, and this being one of the last midweek launches that is not going to be on a school night for a while. So potentially some parents taking advantage of the chance to pop out and take a look at Falcon 9 rocket as it will hopefully take to the skies in just over an hour and 8 minutes from now. T-minus 1 hour, 7 minutes and counting. For those of you who have not been glued to social media or our YouTube website channels today, you know that there was at one point going to be a Falcon Heavy launch as well for SpaceX. You see that there on the left-hand side of your screen. That's a live view of Launch Complex 39A. In fact, we just yesterday marked the 52nd anniversary of special launch from that pad, that being the 52nd anniversary of the Apollo 15 mission, launching a Saturn V rocket from where the Falcon Heavy now stands. SpaceX was intending to launch that Falcon Heavy Yesterday, they reached T-minus 1 minute and 5 seconds, and a hold was called. Ultimately, that ended with an abort. And SpaceX decided to continue doing some checkouts throughout the day today. It was looking like we could have a historic back-to-back launch should both of these have gone. It was poised to potentially break the record held by the Gemini 11 mission back 56 years ago. However, that record still remains intact as the Falcon Heavy is going to remain parked where it is for at least another day. SpaceX is now targeting no earlier than tomorrow, July 28th at 11:04 p.m. Eastern to launch the Falcon Heavy rocket. That's when the 99-minute launch window will open. Of course, a lot of folks eager to see that mission go, not the least of which is NASA, which is waiting for that pad to open back up and for it to turn back over into a Falcon 9 configuration as they are getting down to the final weeks before the next crew rotation mission will lift off from there, that being the Crew 7 mission. We actually had the chance to recently talk with the the 3 astronauts and the 1 cosmonaut who will be flying on the Crew 7 mission. It'll be part of our launch coverage leading up to that liftoff from the pad you see there on the left-hand side of your screen. Because the Falcon Heavy launch has been delayed initially, the Crew 7 mission was set to launch on August 15th. However, earlier this week during a press briefing, NASA said that it would be sliding to 6:56 a.m. Eastern the morning of August 17th. That was before SpaceX delayed the Falcon Heavy launch yet again to no earlier than tomorrow night. So standing by to see exactly when NASA will be able to launch the Crew 7 mission. They do have a few backup opportunities for that. Launch opportunities include, as I just mentioned, the morning of August 17th. They also have August 18th as the next launch opportunity for that. Then they will need to stand down for some activity with Russia's Progress spacecraft. Then they have another couple of opportunities a little bit later on in August. So all of the international partners, that being NASA, the European Space Agency, ESA, Japanese Space Agency, JAXA, and Roscosmos, all have a crew member on board getting ready to fly on a SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft. In fact, the crew was here in Florida just this past weekend, getting a chance to sit in their Dragon and get a feel for it as they are in the final throes of getting ready for their launch. So busy time for the commercial crew program on the SpaceX side. Big marker of that is whenever they're able to launch the Falcon Heavy and its payload, the Jupiter 3 satellite, also known as EchoStar 24, which is going to be the heaviest communication satellite ever launched, comes in about 9.2 tons. So it's a big boy that this Falcon Heavy is going to be launching into a geostationary transfer orbit coming up as soon as tomorrow night. Or T-minus 1 hour, 2 minutes, 25 seconds and counting. And we are now at T-minus 1 hour and counting. If you're just joining us this evening, I'm Will Robinson Smith with Spaceflight Now. Thank you so much for joining our coverage of the SpaceX Starlink 6-7 mission. Appreciate the more than 4,200 of you that are watching along with us tonight. If you are among those who just popped in, you see the Falcon 9 rocket standing tall at the heart of Pad 40. This is Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. As we are under an hour from the launch of this mission, this being the third and final opportunity that SpaceX has in this window to launch this Falcon 9 rocket. The T0 is 12:01 a.m. Eastern on the first minute of the morning of Friday, July 28th. That's 04:01 UTC for those watching from around the world. Joined tonight in this coverage here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center by Stephen Young and Adam Bernstein, who is out operating the cameras, making sure we have fantastic live pictures of the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket getting ready to make its 15th flight, hopefully in less than an hour. As you see on the left-hand side of your screen, it is not the only rocket SpaceX has standing tall today. In fact, SpaceX was hoping to have a doubleheader, potentially making history in the fastest turnaround time for two vehicles launching to orbit from the Eastern Range. However, that plan, that little bit of history was scrapped because SpaceX decided to stand down from the launch opportunity of the Falcon Heavy rocket and launching the Jupiter 3, otherwise known as the EchoStar 24 satellite. Wanted to continue doing a few more checkouts on the Falcon Heavy rocket before it decides to launch. Its next opportunity comes up tomorrow, as a matter of fact. The 99-minute window opens at 11:04 p.m. Eastern, 03:04 UTC. Worth noting, this is the first time SpaceX has not done a static fire of a Falcon Heavy rocket prior to its attempted launch. Of course, we'll continue to keep an eye on the Heavy there on the left-hand side of your screen as SpaceX prepares to make its next launch attempt, and we will let you know on our social medias when that happens, when it is getting ready to lift off. We'll have coverage here live on YouTube as always. And you can follow us on social media as well, besides here on YouTube. You can find us on Threads and on Twitter as well. And of course, as you're enjoying this stream, be sure to tell your friends and family about it. If you could hit the like button and share the stream as well, that's a big help for us as we continue to expand our coverage of the space program. All your engagement and membership to the YouTube channel, very much appreciated. If you are able and you would like to make a YouTube Super Chat donation, that also helps greatly with our coverage as well. And as we are at T-minus 56 minutes and counting, let's talk a little bit more about tonight's Starlink 6-7 mission. This will be the 95th SpaceX launch dedicated primarily to the deployment of satellites for their Starlink internet constellation. On board at the top of that rocket, you see the little bubble there, those payload fairings. Nestled inside are 22 Starlink satellites. These are the newer versions called Starlink V2 Minis. It's a bit of a bridge between the previous version that SpaceX was launching, the version 1.5s, and the next generation satellites, which are going to be the full-size version 2. Those will be launching on SpaceX's fully reusable Starship vehicle. We are under 55 minutes to the current T0 for the Falcon 9 launch of the Starlink 6-7 mission. Just mentioned SpaceX's Starship rocket just a moment ago, so as we are waiting for the Falcon 9 to take off, let's take a little bit of a trip over to Starbase near Boca Chica Beach in Texas there. These views are brought to you by our partners at Lab Padre. Now, it's a little hard to see right now just because of the way these work lights are set up, but on the left-hand side of your screen, you can just kind of make it out there. It's a little more than a third of the way over to the left-hand side. You see the white lights flashing near the top of the screen. The vertical structure just to the left of that, that is the orbital launch mount. Been quite a bit of work happening there since the Starship test launch back on April 20th. And there's a lot more coming up in the near future. In fact, earlier today, SpaceX confirmed that tomorrow it's going to conduct what it calls a, quote, full pressure test of the new Starship flame deflector. That'll be key since one of the issues that came up during the Starship test flight was the amount of concrete and other debris that was flung from the launch site. Something that SpaceX would like to not see happen, as well as other interested parties. Bit of a melancholy note for those who have been tracking the Starship program. Also earlier today, we were seeing some of the work to dismantle Starship number 15, or SN15. This particular ship gained a lot of notoriety, being that it was the one that flew on the 5th high-altitude flight test. And it was able to land without blowing up, which was a big milestone for SpaceX and an important step forward in the Starship program. Still no word quite yet on when exactly the next Starship launch as a full stack will happen. However, there are a number of steps that need to take place before that does. The FAA has said that SpaceX, in fact, has not submitted an incident report regarding the Starship launch test mishap, and that is something that needs to happen before things can proceed. That news first reported by the San Antonio Express News. At the same time, SpaceX and the FAA are also dealing with a lawsuit that was brought by some interested parties in the wake of the launch. Most recent notable court filing in that is there was a motion to dismiss the case that was filed at the end of June. Of course, we'll continue to track the Starship program and all the progress it makes towards its next launch. Important not only for SpaceX and its ambitions with launching its larger Starlink satellites. It has a number of crew missions that it would like to see in the near future. Starship also is going to be used by NASA as the human landing system for the Artemis program as soon as the Artemis 3 mission. So a very important launch vehicle for a lot of folks. T-minus 50 minutes and counting for the Starlink 6-7 mission. Less than 46 minutes remaining in the count tonight for this Starlink mission. Go ahead and talk about where it's going to go as soon as it lifts off here. After T0, the Falcon 9 will leap off the pad here at Launch Complex 40. That's at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Tonight's flying in a southeast trajectory. That'll bring it down toward the Caribbean, and following stage separation, first stage is going to land on one of the SpaceX's 3 drone ships. The one on tap tonight is Shortfall of Gravitas. After that, the upper stage will continue on with the Starlink satellites. Shortly after stage separation, the fairing halves will also jettison a bit downrange of this map. SpaceX is going to be using the recovery vessel Bob today to retrieve those. That ship, as well as the other one, Doug, of course, were named after former NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. The duo famously flew aboard the Demo 2 mission back in May 2020. That was the point at which human spaceflight returned to American soil for the first time since the end of the space shuttle era. SpaceX's other drone ship right now on the East Coast is Just Read the Instructions. It's currently parked in Port Canaveral. Right now, teams are working to offload the booster that was used on the Starlink 6-6 mission from this past Sunday. We'll have a little bit more on today's timeline in just a bit, as we are now under 44 minutes to count. Taking a look at your screen here, this is a file photo of what these Starlink V2 mini satellites will look like as they are stacked in launch configuration. It's a file photo taken from before another Starlink launch. Tonight will be the 7th batch of these V2 mini satellites launched, each of them clocking in at just about 1,760 pounds. That's 800 kilograms. Once on orbit and the solar panels unfurl, they're about 100 feet wide. It's about 30 meters. They use their Argon Hall thrusters for in-orbit maneuvers, and they were built in Redmond, Washington, that is near Seattle.
Pull for propellant load and launch is complete. We are go for propellant load and
And we are at T-minus 40 minutes and counting. Here's the call out in the launch team for the go for propellant loading. We're now under 39 minutes left in the count. Good news on the weather front. Some of the clouds that have been lingering around Florida's Space Coast starting to thin out a little bit. We can see some stars, which is an encouraging sign since the 45th Weather Squadron had previously said that clouds were going to be the main contributing factor to a weather violation here tonight. So if the clouds continue to improve, then we hopefully will be able to see a launch of this Falcon 9 rocket in just about 38 minutes. And as we continue on, let's talk about the timeline for this mission. Pulling up the count here on the screen. Now that we have received the go for propellant loading, T-minus 35 minutes, that's when that will begin. Kerosene will start to load on the first and second stages. That's the rocket grade kerosene, also known as RP1. At the same time, liquid oxygen, otherwise known as LOX, will also start to flow onto the first stage. At T-minus 16 minutes, liquid oxygen will start being flowed into the second stage of the Falcon 9. Prior to this, we'll see what's known as the big vent from the strong back as the feed lines are chilled, and we see some of the liquid oxygen that is vented off hits the moist Florida air, and you see those big vapor clouds start to form around the rocket. It's also a nice little cheat code to see how windy or not it is if the vapor kind of billows straight down from the Falcon 9. Kind of low winds there at the pad. If it goes horizontally, obviously winds are picking up just a little bit more.
Falcon 9 tanks are venting for the start of prop load.
And we hear the call out for tanks venting for the start of prop load. Things moving on smoothly as we're just about a minute and a half.
Debrief in the abort instructions. For non-urgent no-go conditions, brief the CE or LD and they will approve aborting the countdown. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operators shall call hold on the primary countdown net. Launch control will abort the auto sequence immediately and proceed on a launch abort. At T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands-off and relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count.
And they were just listening to the abort criteria, which, of course, we heard SpaceX put into action yesterday for the Falcon Heavy launch, and hopefully they won't need to do the same for this Falcon 9 launch today. Continuing on with the countdown procedure for the Starlink 6-7 mission. T-minus 7 minutes, chill down of the 9 Merlin engines will begin. That involves flowing just a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and the turbo pumps. It's a key step since that helps protect the engines from thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes prior to launch, the first stage kerosene tank should be done filling. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the strong backed retract begin from the Falcon 9 rocket. strong back of the transporter erector. You see the structure there just to the right of the Falcon 9 rocket. It'll tilt back to an angle of 1.5 degrees, just a little bit of a lean back from the Falcon 9, and it will stay in that position until liftoff. At that point, the strong back will swing back in a far more rapid motion, clearing for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9 as it leaps off the pad. At about 2 minutes, liquid oxygen should be
Launch auto sequence has started.
completed on the Falcon 9, and it will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, control of the countdown will be handed over from ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers. Following that, the propellant tanks will be brought up to their appropriate flight pressure. And then the SpaceX launch director will give their go for liftoff. And the engine ignition command will be issued at T-minus 3 seconds. And if all goes according to plan, and everything is healthy and nominal, all 9 of those Merlin engines at the bottom of the rocket will ignite, and the hold-down clamps will release for a liftoff at T0, set for 12:01 a.m., just on the other side of Friday morning. Count stands at T-minus 33 minutes, 50 seconds, and counting. T-minus 32 minutes and counting. If you take a look near the base of the Falcon 9 rocket, you can see some vapor form, that little bit of a ring of chilling at the bottom of the Falcon 9 rocket as both RP-1 and liquid oxygen are now flowing onto the first stage of the rocket. RP-1 also flowing onto the second stage at this time. And for those who were curious in the chat what time it is here in Florida, it is just about to turn over to 11:30 on a Thursday night as we prepare for the Falcon 9 to launch from Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. At one point in time, there was hope for a Falcon Heavy launch as well, but those hopes were dashed earlier in the day, and we have now one mission left on the books as Falcon 9 looks to potentially launch as soon now as tomorrow at 11:04 p.m. Eastern. As we continue our count, we're just about to hit T-minus 30 minutes and counting. Want to thank Rick Manette for becoming a spacecraft commander level member. We certainly rely on membership here as well as on our website, spaceflightnow.com, for keeping our coverage of the space program healthy and robust. And we certainly appreciate all of those who are watching now, as we have about 4,400 of you in the live chat here. Really appreciate you being with us tonight as we get ready for launch. If you're enjoying the coverage, if you could hit the like button, share the stream as well, that's always a big help in getting the coverage out to more folks around the world who are interested in the launch program here in Florida. T-minus 28 minutes and counting for this Starlink launch. We talked about the trajectory. We'll come back to that again a little bit later in the broadcast, but for now, let's talk about where these Starlink satellites are going to be going after they deploy from the upper stage of the Falcon 9. Target orbit has an apogee of 201 miles. That's 323 kilometers above the Earth's surface. It'll be launching to an inclination of 43 degrees above the equator. After they deploy from the upper stage, they'll use their thrusters over the following weeks and months to raise their operational orbit. And as of today, there are more than 4,400 Starlink satellites currently working on orbit around the world. Less than 25 minutes remaining in the count tonight as things are proceeding nominally with propellant load. Things remain on track for the T0 liftoff at 12:01 a.m. Eastern, morning of July 28th. And as we continue with this countdown process, let's talk a little bit about the Falcon 9 vehicle that hopefully will be launching in just over 24 minutes from now. It stands tall at about 70 meters or 229 feet, has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. First stage, largest part of this rocket, bottom 2/3. This one flying for the 15th time, so it has 14 flights underneath it. So first time flying booster would be just as pearly white as you see the second stage above it. However, there's a lot of soot on this one because it's gotten a lot of miles underneath its boosters, so to speak. And we'll come back to those in just a second. At the base of the first stage are those 9 Merlin engines, which burn rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen to produce 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are the black carbon fiber landing legs. They'll be used to land the first stage on the drone ship. A short fall of gravitas, about 8 or so minutes after liftoff. Moving right along up the rocket here. Above the first stage is what's called the inner stage. It's a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core surrounded by carbon fiber. In the inset image here on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypergrid fins. These are titanium winglets that are providing stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it falls back through the atmosphere, tail first. Think of it like the dart. The drone shit is the dartboard, and it hopes to make the bullseye every time. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. And at first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, high pressure helium is used to release those latches and the 4 pneumatic pushers to ensure it has a clean separation. Inner stage also houses the second stage engine nozzle, and it's tucked in there until stage separation. Speaking of the second stage, this is the upper stage that's powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or MVAC. It's equipped with a large nozzle that is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space. Produces more than 200,000 pounds of thrust. It'll be fired twice on today's flight to place these 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites into their intended orbit. The MVAC engine also burns the same propellant mix, that being RP1, or the rocket-grade kerosene, and liquid oxygen, same as the first stage. Following the deployment of the Starlink satellites, it will do a third burn. That would be the deorbit burn, and it will drive the upper stage back into the atmosphere, where it will burn up. It's important since it helps to eliminate the risk of creating unnecessary space debris, something that is of great importance to both nations and launch providers around the world.
Stage 1 pogo.
And last but not least, on the Falcon 9 is the payload fairings right at the top of the rocket. For today's mission, it is cradling the 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites. The payload fairing is made up of a carbon composite material. It's 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall, and 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. These two halves will be recovered a little bit further downrange from where the first stage will land on the drone ship. They will land gently under parachutes.
Stage 2 RP1 load is complete.
And we hear the call out there that stage 2 RP1 loading is complete as we see the big vent is underway. That vapor trailing off perpendicularly to the rocket, so a little bit of wind out there at the pad. Weather was one of the watch items for today's mission, and as we started to see some of the clouds above the pad thin out, hopefully conditions will be such that SpaceX is able to launch this bird in less than 20 minutes. T-minus 18 minutes and counting. As the big vent continues and prop loading rolls right along, let's talk a little bit about the Starlink V2 minis that are going to be launching on today's flight. Compared to their predecessors, the version 1.5 Starlinks, these have 4 times the capacity. They introduced E-band for backhaul. They featured an upgraded phased array antennas. They're actually quite a bit heavier than their predecessors, 2.6 times heavier. And they use argon Hall thrusters, which replace the previously used krypton thrusters. If you want a little visual on what those look like, there's an argon Hall thruster in action. Just about 30 seconds away from the start of liquid oxygen loading onto the second stage.
Two LOX load has started.
And there's the call out for that. As SpaceX continues to launch more and more.
Ground station stepping off for 2, not tracking any issues.
Good news there. SpaceX's count continues nominally, not tracking any issues, which is, of course, what we like to hear as we are 16 minutes away from the T0 time of 12:01 a.m. Eastern. Want to thank the more than 6,000 of you who are joining us for our live launch coverage. If you are enjoying the stream so far, want to share it with more people, if you could hit the like button and share the stream, that would be fabulous, as we rely on your engagement and all the chatting that you're doing in the chat there. Helps us with our coverage of the space program, and we really enjoy bringing this coverage to you from wherever you're watching from around the world. So thank you for spending part of your Thursday evening here locally, or perhaps it is Friday morning already where you are with us. SpaceX coverage continues to expand around the world. Right now you're taking a look at a map of coverage at this point in time. SpaceX has more than 1.5 million Starlink customers. It is now available in more than 60 countries across that threshold earlier this week. On your screen, the lightest blue countries are where Starlink coverage is currently available. The darker shades are where It's a combination of waitlisted and coming soon nations. Taking a look at what those Starlink terminals look like for those that have the internet service. This is a publicity photo from SpaceX on the top of a roof. As SpaceX has been launching more of its Starlink satellites into low Earth orbit, has also been able to expand its service internet packages and the variety of locations in which they can be used. Some of those include now mobily on things like cars. You can also find Starlink internet on planes, trains, as well as ships. It also works in some of the harshest environments around the world, like in this photo at Antarctica. Back to Starlink user just about a day or so ago shared a photo of him getting some drone footage around an active volcano. Perhaps not the safest for him, but it looked like the Starlink terminal was in working order. Now just over 13 minutes left in the count. T-minus 11 minutes, 20 seconds and counting. Things continue to proceed nominally with the fuel loading on the Falcon 9 rocket, getting ready to launch the Starlink 6-7 mission. Want to wind the clock back to a little bit earlier on today. This was when SpaceX was bringing the Falcon 9 upright. This is a time-lapse video captured by our Adam Bernstein earlier today. SpaceX brought the Falcon vertical a little bit later than it normally does, but it seems to be moving toward a good count to T0, so SpaceX getting increasingly faster with its preparations for launch and turnaround times. In fact, it's only been a few days since SpaceX last used this launch pad, Space Launch Complex 40, for its previous Starlink launch. T-minus 8 minutes, 25 seconds and counting. Just about a minute and a half away from the process of the engine chill down of the 9 Merlin engines. Was talking about the turnaround for Space Launch Complex 40. The last mission from this pad was the Starlink 6-6 launch. That was back on July 23rd at 10:50 p.m. Eastern, 0050 UTC. If in fact SpaceX is able to launch tonight, this would be a bit of history for this particular launch pad, being the fastest turnaround time. Previous record was set back in June between the Satria and Starlink 5-12 missions. T-minus 7 minutes, 24 seconds and counting.
Engine chill has started.
T-minus 6 minutes, 45 seconds and counting. Did you hear that good call out for the start of engine chill? As we get into the final minutes of the count, want to talk a little bit about the history of the booster that's going to be flying tonight. It's making its 15th flight, booster tail number B1062. Got quite a bit of legacy under its proverbial belt, so let's take a little stroll down memory lane and talk about that. This booster's debut flight was back on November 5th, 2020.
Stage 1 RP1 load is complete.
And we hear the call out for the completion of RP1 loading on the second stage of the rocket as they continue loading the liquid oxygen. So November 5th, 2020, that was the GPS-3 Space Vehicle 4 satellite. It's built by Lockheed Martin. This is the fourth of the newer version of the U.S. Space Force's GPS constellation. The set of satellites are each given a nickname. This one was given the name of Sacagawea, named after the Shoshone woman who guided Lewis and Clark on their expedition in the 1800s. Next up for this booster was June 17th, 2021, launching another GPS satellite, this being Space Vehicle number 5. This happened to get the nickname of Neil Armstrong, of course, first person to set foot on the moon. Next up was the third flight, the first of this booster supporting humans to orbit, back on September 15th, 2021. This is a big milestone, the launch of the 4-member crew known as Inspiration 4, led by billionaire Jared Isaacman.
Falcon 9 tanks are pressurizing for strong back retract.
And you hear the call for tank pressurization for strong back retract, set to begin shortly. Jared Isaacman busy working on another suite of launches, that being the Polaris program. First of those is set to launch later this year, potentially. At one point, it was going to be some point over the summer, but now it is shuffled again a little bit to the right and is now looking at the fourth quarter of 2023 for the first mission, that being Polaris Dawn. Coming back to this booster, its fourth launch came on April 8th. On January 6th, 2022. That was the Starlink 4-5 mission carrying 49 version 1.5 satellites on board. Launch number 5 came up April 8th, 2022. This was the second time this booster supported people. This is when it launched the Crew Dragon. See a lot of vapor coming from the rocket there as we are just about 3.5 minutes from liftoff, and the strong back retract is underway. You can see it start to lean back from the Falcon 9 Another sign that things are proceeding well toward liftoff in just over 3 minutes from now. That fifth launch featured the first private astronaut mission, Axiom 1 for Axiom Space, sending that 4-member crew to the International Space Station, led by former NASA astronaut Michael Lopez Alegria. Then on April 29th, a little bit later that month, it was actually 21 days, 6 hours, 10 minutes to be specific. That was on
launch load is complete.
April 29th. Stage 1 LOX loading complete there.
Stage 1 logo.
Now, this was also an important milestone here because this was the shortest turnaround for this booster, and also at this point became the new record holder for SpaceX as far as turnaround for a booster flying again, beating the old record that was held by B1060 by nearly a week. Seventh flight was June 8th, was Nilesat. That was Nilesat 301. Seventh flight then was followed up by a slate of Starlink missions. That was flights 8 through 12, starting with Starlink 425, Starlink 427, 436, Starlink 5-1, and Starlink 5-4, which brings us up to February 12th, 2023. That was followed by the 13th flight on March 9th. That was the OneWeb Mission 17, launching a batch of 40 OneWeb broadband internet satellites. Less than 2 minutes in the count here for this particular Starlink mission. Rolling right along, it had its
Stage 2
14th
launch load is complete.
and final launch with the Arabsat 7B, otherwise known as the Badr 8 satellite. That was back on May 27th, 2023. And that brings us to the launch tonight in just under a minute and a half. Starlink 6-6 mission. And things are proceeding well with the count. As we are now at T-minus 1 minute and counting for the launch of the Starlink 6-7 mission, the 15th flight for this Falcon 9
is
booster.
in startup.
As Falcon 9 has now reached startup, onboard computers have control of the count. We're getting ready to hear the final go for launch, which should be coming up
LD, go for launch.
right there. Falcon 9 now clear to launch. Soon thousands of gallons of water will be dumped onto the launch pad to protect the vehicle from the reflected sound waves as it gets ready to lift off. T-minus 30 seconds now. The final seconds of this countdown, you should see a green flash of the T-tab ignition fluid. Once the 9 Merlin engines reach full thrust, the hold-down clamps will release the rocket. It'll take about 25 seconds after liftoff for the engine roar to reach our location. We are just 1 second. You see ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket carrying the Starlink 6-7 mission to low Earth orbit. 22 Starlink V2 mini satellites now heading up into space. We're T plus 22 minutes, 22 seconds and counting into the flight. And we're starting to hear the rumble now from our Spaceflight Now Bureau here at the press site at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. In a little less than 10 seconds, those Merlin engines will be throttling down as the vehicle approaches max Q, point of greatest dynamic atmospheric pressure on the rocket. Got a great tracking shot being provided by Adam Bernstein for us out in the field. T plus 1 minute 5 seconds. Oh, look at that. As Falcon 9 punches through the clouds that at one point looked like they might be a limiting factor, limited no more as this bird is off and soaring. T plus 1 minute 24 seconds and counting. Less than 1 minute left on the burn of the first stage. Those Merlin engines producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Falcon 9 now more than 20 kilometers in altitude, traveling above 2,800 kilometers per hour. T+1 53 seconds into the mission. MVAC chill down is underway. Second stage is being thermally conditioned so that single Merlin vacuum engine ignition can be prepared. A little more than 2 minutes into flight now. We're getting ready for main engine cutoff, or MECO, where you see the Merlin engines shut down, followed by stage separation and ignition of the upper stage. All will happen in rapid succession, followed by the jettison of the payload fairings. And we're still seeing some great views of the first stage there. Right there. You see MECO as those 9 Merlin engines have shut off. Oh, and look at that. Some great views. This is the onboard views from SpaceX and the Falcon 9, where you see the stage separation there. And that little bright dot on your screen, we are at T+3 minutes and counting. Still seeing just a great view of the Merlin vacuum engine. As fairing separation is confirmed. Just some gorgeous views on an otherwise dreary Thursday night, but SpaceX managing to hit their launch target as we are now 3 minutes 40 seconds into this flight. Those 2 fairing halves that were jettisoned are going to be retrieved today by the SpaceX recovery vessel Bob, brought back to Port Canaveral, where SpaceX will grab those and recover them to be reused on a future mission. Taking a look here, this is the trajectory of the mission for tonight. As you see, stage 2 coasting. Now approaching speed of nearly 10,000 kilometers per hour at an altitude of 133 kilometers. Stage 1 booster maneuvering to land on the drone ship. A short fall of gravitas. Just a matter of minutes. Vehicle starting to slow down. T+4 minutes, 47 seconds and counting up. Coming up at about T+6 minutes. Be the preparation for that entry burn on the first stage. We'll burn to slow the descent rate of that Falcon 9 booster. Reduce heating on the vehicle as it continues to encounter friction in the atmosphere. T+5 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. First stage has reached its peak and is now decidedly on its descent back towards the drone ship. As we're about 30 seconds or so away from the start of the entry burn. And you can see on the left-hand side of your screen the start of that entry burn, T+6 minutes, 17 seconds into the flight. And we're getting some views of that entry burn there from SpaceX's onboard cameras from the Falcon 9 first stage. as this booster getting ready to make its 15th landing following a successful liftoff. And we can see the shutdown of that entry burn. That booster now traveling considerably slower than it was just moments ago. T plus 7 minutes and counting into the flight. Stage 1 will become transonic in just a matter of seconds now, as it slows to below the speed of sound. And if the signal remains good, we should see the drone ship coming into view not too much longer from now. Shortfall of gravitas is the intended target. And there's a call out for stage 1 becoming transonic. SpaceX will use a single Merlin engine for the landing burn. It's coming up in the next about 10 seconds or less. T plus 8 minutes into the flight. Landing burn now underway. And hopefully we'll get some good views of the drone ship coming into view shortly. And there it is as the landing legs are deploying. That booster getting ready to touch down on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. And there it is. This booster making its 15th trip to space and back, landing safely on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. An important marker in this mission, as SpaceX will bring this booster and the drone ship back to Cape Canaveral to be refurbished and turned around for another mission. SpaceX has 2 boosters that have flown 16 times now, as it looks to increase its reusability potentially up to 20 flights. And the company says it will use these Starlink missions, as it is both the launch provider and the launch customer, as it pushes toward that 20 mission milestone, validating its boosters for many reuses to come. T plus 9.5 minutes into the flight. Just about T plus 10 minutes into the flight now. Second engine cutoff should have happened at this point. And the upper stage will continue in a coast phase for more than 40 minutes. At T plus 5407 into the mission, the engine will kick back on for 3 seconds. Second engine start, SES2. And the 22 Starlink satellites will deploy just over an hour into the flight. T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 17 seconds. T plus 12 minutes, 8 seconds into the flight. We're going to go ahead and wind down our live coverage here on this stream. We want to thank all of you who have been joining us tonight and have shared the stream, hit the like button, contributed to the conversation in the chat. We appreciate all the engagement from this coverage. Taking a look toward the future of spaceflight here from Florida. We have the Falcon Heavy launch that is coming up in as soon as tomorrow night. SpaceX has set aside time at 11:04 p.m. Eastern, 03:04 UTC, the morning of the 29th, for the launch of this Falcon Heavy rocket with the payload for Hughes and EchoStar Company. That is Jupiter 3, otherwise known as EchoStar 24, which is still nestled in the payload fairings at the top of the Falcon Heavy rocket there. That launch originally set for Wednesday night. They had a scrub at T-minus 1 minute 5 seconds. Looks like Thursday night was going to be a potential for that. They decided to stand down from that launch opportunity, which sets up tomorrow as the next potential opportunity for this Falcon Heavy to launch. And of course, we will keep you posted on all the activities happening at Launch Complex 39A, where the Falcon Heavy is sitting now, as well as future flights from the pad that we just saw a launch from, that being Space Launch Complex 40 over at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I want to thank all of you again for being with us on what may be a work night for some, a vacation night for others, taking one last look at Pad 40. It is, like the Falcon 9, a workhorse for SpaceX, so it will be populated with another rocket and another mission quite soon. And we'll bring you all that activity as it develops here from Florida Space Coast. So for Stephen Young, Adam Bernstein, I'm Will Robinson-Smith. Thanks for joining us. If you'd like to continue following the Starlink 6-7 mission, we will continue to have updates on the mission's progress over on our Launchpad live stream on our YouTube channel here. But for now, from this feed, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.